Welcome to this week's Crowd Church service. We are a digital church on a quest to discover how Jesus helps us live a more meaningful life. We are a community, a space to explore the Christian faith, and a place where you can contribute and grow. Our service will last about an hour, and in a few seconds you'll meet our hosts for our service who will introduce today's talk. After the talk, we will have a time of worship and reflection, after which we head into Conversation Street, where we look at your stories and questions that you've posted in the comments. Now, we want to invite you to connect with us here at Crowd Church, and we've got a few ways in which you can do just that. Firstly, you can engage with Crowd from any device during our live stream, and if you're up for it, why not invite a few friends over and experience the service together? You see, church is all about connecting with God and connecting with others. And one of the easiest ways for you to do that is join one of our midweek groups where we meet online together to catch up and discover more about the amazingness of Christ. You can also subscribe to our fairly new podcast called What's the Story, where we deep dive into stories of faith and courage from everyday people. More information about all of these things can be found on our website at www.crowd.church, or you can reach out to us on social media at Crowd Church. If you are new to Crowd or new to the Christian faith and would like to know what your next steps to take are, well, why not head over to our website, crowd.church/next, for more details. And now, the moment you've been waiting for is here. Our online church service starts right now. Well, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Crowd Online Church. It's great that you're with us here on Remembrance Sunday. And I'm with the beautiful and amazing Claire. Claire, thank you for joining us today. How are we doing?
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. I love taking a little moment there to remember. Yeah, good to be with you all today. Thanks for having
Yeah.
me.
No, it's great that you're here. And I'm loving your poppy.
I know. Oh, wrong side. Crochet.
Not
I
done
have
by you.
bone in my body.
Okay. Fair enough. For those of you outside of the UK, Remembrance Sunday is just a time when we remember those who have fallen, who are in service at the moment, and have fought so bravely for us over the years in the many battles that we've had to face. And so, yeah, that's why we do it. And do you know why we wear the poppies, Claire?
Yeah, basically in in France, where people's bodies died when the poppy grows after disturbed ground, and so it was what was growing on, over people's bodies, the graveyards really of the fallen soldiers, and I think it was just a really stark reminder that life comes after death. I think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And there was that famous poem, wasn't there, in Flanders Fields, where poppies grow,
Yeah.
which came from the war as well, the Great War. So,
Yeah.
yes, it's always good to take time and just be grateful and thankful. I'm reminded of the words by Churchill, never have so many owed so much to so few. And it's very true. And so, yes, whether wars are just or right or wrong, or the morals of that we can get into maybe another day. But just for now, we say thank you and we are grateful.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us on this Remembrance Sunday. Today we are carrying on our trawl, is maybe the wrong word, our journey.
He was a fisherman. I think that's
yeah, well, let's go with trawl. Through the Gospel of John. We're in a series called Origin, and we have been on a whistle-stop tour through the Gospel of John, looking at the life of Christ, getting ready to dig into a book called Acts, which is a great book. Just sort of describes the life of the early church and what happened right there at the beginning, which we're really keen to get into. But of course, we can just spend a little bit of time here in John's Gospel. So my very good friend, Mr. Tony Uddin, who is a pastor of a church down in Tower Hamlets, is going to be sharing with us today. After that, we're going to have a time of worship. And then after that, we've got Conversation Street with myself and Claire, all in the context of Remembrance Sunday as well. So we are going to be carrying on that conversation. But before we get into Tony's talk, there's a lot of T's in there. I've just realised it's Tony's talk. Before we get into Tony's, we've
something, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. You should read something. Yeah. So we are in John's Gospel, chapter 13. I think, is it Claire? You just read it out.
Okay, so it's John's Gospel 13 from the start of the chapter through to verse 16, and it's called in this Bible, it's Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from the world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, "Lord, are you washing my feet?" Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, You are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, Well, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him.
Very good. So we are going to let Tony carry on that conversation as we talk about what that means. And if you're new to the Christian faith or not heard that passage before, it's not a bit weird, washing each other's feet.
Girded was the word that I was amused by.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
Jesus was girded. So and I'm looking forward to that conversation, let me tell you. So here is Tony's talk related to that passage. After that, like I said, there's going to be some worship, and then Claire will be back. Claire and I will be back for Conversation Street. So do add your questions, do add your comments in there. I can see we've got some people in there already. Got Matt Crew, we've got Elizabeth, Miriam in there. So I'm not reading the second name, rather than the first name. Sharon's in there. We're all in the comments. So do come and say hi. It'd be great to see you. And yeah, we'll be back for Conversation Street after worship, after this.
Good afternoon. It's great to be with you at Crowd Church today as you continue your look through John's Gospel. We're today at John chapter 13, and I want us to look at how Jesus sets an example of servant leadership. In the chapters just before this, we see Jesus' entry back into Jerusalem. In one sense, warmly welcomed, but in another sense, talking about the fact that he would go to the cross. And now what I want us to see is that John's Gospel gives this tremendous detail of the last few hours, particularly, and of Jesus' ministry before he was arrested. As John's Gospel moves towards its climax, we see that so much of it is focused on the last couple of days of Jesus' life. And here we see in John 13, Jesus is preparing to go to the cross. And in doing so, he sets the example of what it is to be a servant. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? Just how much leadership is such a contested topic. Our world has high expectations of leadership, but generally low expectations of leaders. We want leaders, we want leadership that will be good, that will look out for our best. We want leadership that causes others to thrive, but generally our experience is of leaders who use the power and authority they have in self-serving ways. That's certainly true in politics. It's often true in business. It's true in so many areas, and unfortunately at times it's even sometimes true of the church. And Jesus is leaving and setting the disciples a really powerful example of what servant leadership is. So I want us to take a closer look at that. Firstly, the context. Jesus' love is expressed through being with his disciples. Jesus' love is expressed through being with his disciples. Verse 1 says, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. The very last day of Jesus' public ministry. You know, Jesus knew he was going to the cross, and he was communicating something to his disciples simply by the fact that he was with them and that he was giving them his undivided attention. It's a powerful thing, isn't it, that we show people honor and respect through giving them time. Sometimes it may even be easier to give someone money than it is to give them our time. And what we see is Jesus is giving them time in the last day before his arrest. He wants to be with his disciples. If you knew that your life was to end in a week's time, probably change how you live your life, wouldn't it? If you knew that your life was to end in a month's time or a year's time, I think you'd probably live differently. I'm certainly hope I would. Jesus knew that within hours he would be arrested, and yet he chose to be with his disciples. By being with them, he was expressing what it is to be a servant leader. But also we know that Jesus was preparing them for the fact that he would go to the cross. He was building them up. John includes in his gospel his own reason for writing the gospel. John chapter 20 verse 31. But these things have been written so that you may believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. John wanted his readers, people like you and I who would read this gospel, to believe in Jesus, and through believing in Jesus find life, real life, eternal life, life abundant. And Jesus wanted his disciples to have that. That is why he was willing to go to the cross. In speaking about what was to happen, in preparing his disciples, in being with them, Jesus was expressing love through servanthood. I want us just to contrast that with the disciples. This same account, the account of the same thing in Luke 22 shows us that actually there was a argument that had developed between the disciples at this time. In verse 24 of Luke 22, it says, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was to be considered the greatest. Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. The greatest among you shall be the youngest, and the one who rules will be the one who serves. Jesus is preparing to go to the cross, to die for your sin and mine, to pay the ultimate price, to show what it is to be a servant. And the disciples are jostling for position. They're saying, Jesus, am I going to be the one that gets the best place when you go? And in the midst of this, Jesus shows them what true servant-hearted leadership is like. Not something that is just merely expressed in words, but communicated in actions. And Jesus' actions of being with them. The phrase that's used there in verse 1 is he loved them to the end. By being with them, by preparing to give his life for them, Jesus was showing that love is expressed, and it's expressed in servant-heartedness. But also, secondly, Jesus showed them that love is demonstrated, and he demonstrated it by washing the disciples' feet. In verse 3 we read, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel round his waist. After that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Jesus knew that he was going back to the Father. He knew that he was preparing to face the cross and then would be raised and return to God the Father. And in doing so, he sets the tone. This idea that he got up, he says, this is what I have to leave you with. I have to show you something that is so important. And that was that he would wash his disciples' feet. The scandal of the greatest teacher who ever was, washing the feet of the disciples. The scandal of God himself in human flesh. The one through whom and for whom all things were made. humbling himself before human feet in all of their squalor and filth. It's a remarkable picture, isn't it? This is the glory of God. You want to see the power and glory of God? The power and glory of God is demonstrated in Jesus washing the disciples' feet. You know, years ago I worked in homelessness, and there was a podiatrist I worked with, and her role was to go out on the streets and to find entrenched rough sleepers and to really, people who are resistant to help, very often with extremely poor personal hygiene. And her role was to basically help them with their feet. And I was struck time and time again how she would literally deal with some of the worst, most unhygienic feet you could imagine. And she'd do it with a smile on her face, treating people with utter dignity and respect. Whenever I think of her, I'm reminded of this passage. This is a manifestation of the glory of God. Here's the substance. Here's what God looks like. Getting involved at the lowest possible level. This is the power of God at work as Jesus washes the disciples' feet. You know, it was the job of in the context at the time, of the lowest servant in the house to wash the feet. It wouldn't even have been a normal servant's job. Really, if you were washing people's feet, you were the lowest of the low. You were at the bottom of the pile. You know, those of you who maybe watched something like Downton Abbey, you'll have seen, you know, the butler, he's quite prim and proper, isn't he? And so much that he views as being beneath him. He's risen to a different station in life. And as you go through the different servants, they all look down on the one below. Well, the job of washing the feet in Jesus' time was for the very lowest of the low. And Jesus demonstrates humility. Jesus demonstrates servanthood by washing their feet. It's quite interesting. As Jesus does this, they would have been shocked and scandalized. And I want us to see, to contrast Peter's response with Jesus. Jesus is demonstrating humility, but in one sense, Peter is demonstrating pride. In verse 8, Peter says, "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." When Jesus wants to wash the disciples' feet, Peter thinks he knows better. And his pride won't let Jesus do it. And one of the things, true humility means acknowledging and understanding that God knows best. Peter's pride is about to be humbled. He's going to come, and we'll see this as these chapters go on, he's going to come to the end of himself, the end of his own self-will. You see, even though it was wrapped up in a kind of false humility, Jesus, I'll never let you do that. What we're experiencing there is pride and self-will. When Jesus reminds him of the need to have his feet washed, Peter says, then wash the whole of me. Don't just stop at my feet. Interesting how Jesus answers in verse 10. Those who've had a bath and you don't need to wash the feet, their whole body is clean and you are clean. You see, Jesus is going to make them clean through the fact that he would die on the cross. He was about to give his life. Jesus was going to die in their place, but in your place and mine. That on the cross, Jesus was going to take every sin, every wrongdoing, all of our selfishness, all the junk from our hearts, and place them on himself, so that by having faith in him, we can be made new, forgiven, having a new start. And Jesus wants Peter to know that it's that will make him clean, not just having his feet washed. But Jesus wants to do this as a demonstration, but also a metaphor for what it is to lead. That to lead involves servanthood and humility. And that means firstly acknowledging that Jesus is Lord, not us. It means acknowledging that his way is best, not ours. It means acknowledging that we can no longer live in our own self-will. If Jesus was the ultimate servant, then to follow his example, we need to embrace his humility and die to self-will. Watchman Nee famously said, attempting to follow Jesus without denying the self is the root of all failures. Peter was about to fail. He was about to deny Jesus. He was about to come to the end of his pride. Jesus was showing him, and Jesus' actions show us what true humility looked like. Jesus demonstrates the role of servant leadership. Wouldn't it be amazing if our politicians, if our business leaders, if as church leaders, we lived in such a way that demonstrated that we are firstly servants? It's the example Jesus gave. But Jesus gave a demonstration that was to be followed. That's point number 3. That Jesus' actions are for us to follow. Verse 12, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, the Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example, and you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So Jesus expresses his love for his disciples by being with them. Jesus demonstrates his love for them by washing his feet, but he also gives them a command to do likewise. Leadership in the kingdom of God is ultimately about serving. We have the example of Jesus. Verse 13 there, you call me Lord and teacher, and rightly so, for what? That is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. If it was good enough for Jesus, then it's the example we should follow. You know, think about the examples of servanthood and humility in your life. You know, one of the things that strikes me is my father came as a migrant from Bangladesh, and when he came, he basically spent his life working all kinds of jobs and worked hard because he wanted us to have a better life than he had. He wanted us to have the opportunities that he never had. He gave of himself because he wanted better for us. That's what a good father does. Now, sadly, a lot of fathers aren't that way. But Jesus set the example of what it is to give of ourselves, to give of our very best in a selfless way. I believe that in the kingdom of God, aspiring to be a servant is an end in itself. And I want to challenge you today, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, that involves using whatever power, whatever influence, whatever responsibility you have, whatever privilege you have in life. My challenge is for you today, will you use it for yourself or will you use it for others? Jesus set the example of the ultimate sacrifice. We don't need to die for anybody's sins. Jesus has done it for us. But like him, we need to be willing to come to the end of ourselves in that sense. We need to live for him. We need to act in humility and serve others. So does that mean we should all go around and basically have a service where we wash each other's feet? Well, I don't think it's about that. What it's about is the example of Jesus willing to take on the lowest of tasks to serve others. I want to ask you, what does that look like for you? Are you willing to take on the lowest of tasks? Maybe that means mowing someone's lawn. Maybe it means letting others take the credit for the project at work. Maybe it means putting somebody else in the spotlight, allowing them to receive praise. Maybe it means cleaning someone's toilet. Maybe it might mean dropping someone else's kids off for them, even when you've got a busy day. You see, servanthood is the opposite of selfishness. But also maybe there's something more fundamental here. Maybe even the fact that Jesus gave the disciples his time ought to speak to us about servanthood through giving others our time. I know for me, it's very easy for me to be distracted. I have a short attention span. And maybe being a servant in terms of our leadership means giving the person in front of us our full attention. Maybe it means not looking at our phones while they're speaking. Maybe being a servant means being places on time, showing respect for others. Maybe it means being willing to do the hard work, manual work, grunt work it might seem like to you. Maybe it means like not asking people to do things that we're not prepared to do ourselves. You know, the Church of Jesus is at its most beautiful when it is like him, and that is a church of servants. We don't really have time, but there's a beautiful passage in Philippians 2 verses 1 to 11 which is in one sense a parallel passage to this. It shows how Jesus got up. In John it says Jesus got up. Philippians 2 says Jesus left the glories of heaven. John says Jesus took off his robe. Philippians says Jesus emptied himself and came as a man. John says Jesus took up a towel. Philippians says Jesus came as a servant. John shows us that Jesus poured water into a bowl. Jesus' example was that he poured out his life. It says in this passage in John that when he finished washing the disciples' feet, he sat down again. Philippians tells us that Jesus, when God raised him, is seated at the right hand of God. I want to ask you, are you willing to follow the example of Jesus? That sacrificial love for God, sacrificial love for each other, and sacrificial love for a hurting and dying world. Jesus' love, verse 1 told us, was loving to the end, complete, unending, not tokenistic, not convenient, but sacrificial. I want to ask you, what's your response to King Jesus, the King who was a servant? Are you prepared to live a life of service to God and service to others? God bless you.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most I his blood. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did as such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, I thank you for the cross, my Lord. I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, my Lord. I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, I love you for the cross, my Lord.
Welcome back, Claire. Welcome back to me. I mean, no one else has gone anywhere. We were the ones that left, I suppose, just thinking about it. Yes, love that song. And we're going to get into the words of that hymn, actually, because that hymn talked about sacrifice. Tony talked a lot about sacrifice in his talk, and today is Remembrance Sunday, where we remember the sacrifice of many people. And so we're going to get into all of that. Claire, it's been a while since you have heard from Tony. You were talking about this before we went on live, weren't you? That it's been a wee while. But what did you think to that talk?
I just think, their example down, they work down in London, don't they, in a church. I know that they do amazing things in their community, just very practical, loving, kind, serving stuff. Tony and his wife and their team down there. So yeah, just brilliant. I think there was something that really struck me. I think it's often the simplest things, giving time and attention to people, you know, actually paying real attention to people doing. See, the song that was going through my head a little bit was not When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, but How Low Can You Go? Do you remember that one? No. Sorry, I've completely gone off piece here, but just, I think, almost not a competition, because it isn't a competition, but trying to kind of outdo each other.
Yeah.
As servant-hearted and as loving and as giving, to do the lowest job, the job that nobody else wants to do. And I think that is a real challenge, isn't it, to us just every day? Because there's always something more exciting or more fun to do, isn't there?
There's always something that's more selfish to do. And there's I don't know about you, Claire, but I find there's never a shortage of selfish things to do. There's just an abundance of them. And so it's a really interesting one, isn't it? I think I want to get into some of the things that Tony said. And one of the questions that Miriam's put in the post, I think it's a really interesting question, because Tony, he sort of ends this sort of talk with, will you be more Christ-like? Will you do this? Will you become more servant-minded? Which I think is a great question. And, he talked about why that is. But it's just a really interesting question, is it, in terms of balance? How do you do that? What is the balance between, what's the fancy phrase everyone loves at the moment, which really winds me up? Self-care. That's it. Self-love, self-care. And you're just like, oh.
I'm with you.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, no. I've got this. Is what I mean. There's not a shyness in terms of selfishness in the world at the moment, and so I guess for a question for you, Claire, is how do you bring that balance, right? Because you've done the missionary thing, you've given up your life and gone into distant, faraway lands. You're a beautiful lady. You're a beautiful mum. You're a wife. You're doing all these things for work, serving, helping people. Go. How do you do balance? Go.
Not quite sure there was a real question in there. I'll do my best. I think, can I read this bit from Philippians that I found?
Go for
it. Tony mentioned it, but I'm reading from the Message from your bookshelf actually, Matt. But it was talking about if you've got anything out of all of following Christ, if his love has made any difference in our lives, I'm paraphrasing, if being in a community of the Spirit means anything to us, if we have a heart, if we care, then do me a favour. I think it's Paul writing to the Philippians, isn't it?
Yeah.
Agree with each other, love each other, be deep-spirited friends. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet talk your way to the top. I love that. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand. And I just thought that really, Tony wanted to sort of read it, but there's only so much time, isn't there? I think, it's not about forgetting yourself in all of that. It's not about, burning the candle at both ends and being so exhausted that you can't kids up on time. It's not about that. It's about, I think it's about, for me, it's trying to listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit, to that little nudge, to say, oh, just stop and just listen to that person for a bit longer, or there's just trying to find those moments to connect and to love people, I think, and in whatever way that might be, whether it's giving something to somebody on the street or a stranger, or I think the challenge is even more with your family, because they see the rough edges, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
And I'm particularly grumpy at night, and that's when they need me most. I'm like, just go to bed. I don't want to read a story to you now.
Well, we best not overrun with a live stream then. That's all I'm saying. Best not overrun. No, I think it's very true. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's not all about give, but it's not all about take. And there seems to be a balance, doesn't there? And Sharon's put here in the comments, do you think there's a place for self-care in the Christian life? Because I appreciate that by our comment, we may have just ticked everybody off that thinks self-care is important.
I think there's a pendulum, isn't there? And I think a pendulum swing. And
Yeah.
I totally think that you have to look after yourself, and love one another, as yourself, kind of thing. That is a quote, isn't it? From the Bible.
Jesus said it, so it's fine. Yeah.
Jesus said it. Sometimes we quote Jesus and we get it wrong sometimes, but that is really one. And I think you have to take care of yourself, don't you? Otherwise But I think we're just reacting to the word self-care, aren't we? That
We are a
feels
little bit.
the
Yeah.
Western world, it's been bandied around a lot, and I think sometimes it is an excuse for selfishness, but 9 times out of 10, it's your body
Yeah.
tells you just need to stop. Even if it's half an hour, get a little nap. I'm all about the daytime naps.
The power naps, dun dun dun. No, I agree, Claire. I think you're right. I think regardless of what you want to call it, and the reason why self-care winds me up is because it becomes an excuse not to do anything for anybody else. And that's, I think, why I've struggled with it as much as I have.
Yeah.
But the principles are still there. Like you say, love one another as you love yourself. Treat others as you would want to be treated. There is this sort of do not think of yourself more highly than you should. Doesn't mean to think of yourself lowly. It's just not more highly than you should. Help others get along. Prefer others. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of, I think it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? That actually there is this balance that we have to fight. But as Christians, actually the emphasis is more on servant. And I think the whole concept of leadership being servant leadership is something, without getting too political, that our political leaders...
Can we not?
Our political leaders should definitely... Well, I'm quite happy to get political. But it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like Rishi Sunak, who is the now Prime Minister of Britain. What's my best advice for him? Be a servant, right?
Yeah.
It's that kind of servant leadership is the best form of leadership. And I think self-serving leadership is always just caught out, isn't it? And we struggle with it. And so, yeah, it's one of those where I think if you are in some form of leadership, asking yourself the question, like how well am I doing in the servant leader role, is not a bad question to ask yourself. And how can I improve in that? Right? How can I do that? Tim Keller quoted. Go on.
I've got an absolutely brilliant manager at work, and I've been so impressed with how she has set. She just really recognises like when our team needs a bit of a break, and one time she did a bit of self-care with us, but it was lovely. She bought us little chocolates, she bought us some hankies, she bought us a few little things like that. But she also spent time thinking about the individual qualities that we all brought to the team. And it was just so thoughtful and from her heart. And I was just like, you're a brilliant manager. As far as I know, doesn't know Jesus, but has really modelled great leadership to me.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. Dion's put in the comments here, what do you think about servanthood being an attitude rather than an action? So it's more about our motivation rather than how much actual serving we do. I like the idea, and I'm very anti the measurement brigade. Do you know what I mean? I've done 14 hours of serving this week, so therefore I've checked that off in my checkbox. I'm not a big fan of that. And so I would agree that it starts with attitude. Don't know about you, Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I do, but I think also kind of the proof of the pudding's in the eating. I think if you say stuff, you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk. I think it's that balance, isn't it? Of it's good. I think actions, in a sense, speak louder for me. I'm a bit of an activist.
No, really, really, Claire.
not so much of a thinker, not a philosophical type.
Yeah.
And so you know, do think, do ponder, and then do it.
Yeah, but I think Dion's right. I think it's got to come out of a right attitude, you know. And Paul talks about this, doesn't he? And he's like, if I do this, if I give away this, and do that, and do all these amazing things, but don't have love, then I've become as a resounding gong, or whatever the King James says, which is a great phrase. And so,
Gongs.
yes, we don't want resounding gongs. We don't want that hot air nonsense. And Dion's put here, actually, faith and works go hand in hand, which is totally right. And you know, you've got to have both. So here was a question that I came across when I quickly Googled questions people have about servant leadership while Tony was doing his talk, and I thought this was a great question. Who do you serve who cannot repay you in any way?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's a really fascinating question, isn't it?
Yeah, because I think I was thinking about the same sort of thing while Tony was speaking, that actually, if you're, and I think it's that sweet talking your way to success. If we're doing things to people that we know can somehow, you know, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, or the other way around, or whatever, you know, that's not really serving, is it? I mean,
No.
You know, but if you're doing things, what is it, to the least of these, then you're doing it unto Jesus, you know. And I think I've actually had a couple of amazing examples of washing people's feet. Shall I tell you very briefly about that?
I'm curious now. Yeah, go for it.
It's actually one of my things that I really like to do, and I'm going to slightly tweak it. I'm going to call it a pedicure rather than washing your feet, because but people are very people don't like generally other strangers touching their feet, or you know. But I've had some beautiful opportunities. There was one time in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and another time in Kyrgyzstan, where I lived for a few years, and those were countries where people didn't have great footwear, so a bit like Jesus's time, you know, dodgy sandals and, you know, muddy floors and all the rest of it. And these women were just working so hard. Nobody ever gave them any time, or you know, they never would normally go for a pedicure. It wasn't those kind of places. They didn't have that sort of money, you know, and it was just such a treat. You know, they were embarrassed at the start, but then were just like, oh, this is really lovely, thank you. You know, and you know, and it's more blessed to give than it is to receive, isn't it? You know, I think they had a good time, but actually, I was having a better time. You know, so. But I think it's trying to find those other ways, isn't it? Like Tony said, it's not actually about us all, you know, grabbing the towel around our waist. And, hello, can I wash your feet?
Knocking on your neighbour's door with a bucket and a sponge. No, it's not going to work.
Oh, it's Maundy Thursday today. Maundy Thursday, that's a great, isn't it?
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think the question right was, you know, don't ask people to do things that you personally wouldn't do. And I think everyone around you needs help, and it's understanding where you can help, and you know where that shape is, or where that hole is that you can fill, and be God's hands in that situation. I think it's interesting. So Matt's put here, he regularly works with those in need. Dion's put she volunteers for a domestic abuse charity, which is amazing. And I think it's one of the, I just want to give a shout out to my Christian brothers and sisters here. I'm going to get the figures wrong. Sharon's going to shout at me, but you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. And I'll face up to it later. I think Sharon was telling me she was listening to a guy talk about the third sector, so the charity sector here in the UK. And the Christian population apparently is about 2% in the UK. It's not huge. We would say, I would, you know, England in effect is a Christian country, but those who would be professing active Christians, who would have some kind of active faith rather than just being Christian by sort of a natural response or, you know, heritage, it's about 2%. So it's a small part of the population. But Christians make up around, I think it was 60% of the workforce in the third sector, in the charity sector. And so, you know, the church, for all its faults and problems, is just full of people who want to serve and help. And so big up to my Christian brothers and sisters if you do work in the third sector. It's amazing. And I think we should keep doing that and keep serving. And it's important. it's the highest form of leadership, and I think it has a big impact on the nation. So
And it really does. I think the church does really punch above its weight in, metaphorically. But I think also there's that challenge to all of us to not kind of be Jesus or be the savior, be the one with all the answers, but to actually ask people, well, actually, how can I serve you?
Yeah.
And humility to think, oh yeah, well, I think that they might need this, but actually, let me talk to them, and maybe they might need that, or something else, or maybe I'm not the person who can help them, but either I can pray, or I can give financially, or I can suggest to somebody else, oh, you're really good at this, could you do this? We don't, working together as the church is brilliant.
Yeah, and that's what we should be doing, right? That's what we should be doing in community. And so, love the conversation. It's this whole thing, why do we do it? Why do we do the servant thing? And Tony talked about it. Jesus modeled it, didn't he? This was his whole deal. And in that song we sang, all the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. In other words, let me lay down selfishness. That's my sacrifice. And let me take up the call of Christ, which is servanthood. Don't get me wrong, I'm not brilliant at this. I am getting better. I am getting better over the years. So yes, servanthood. So I think we will end that conversation there, because looking at time, if I don't, we're just going to carry on. Was that you just looking at time like that? Brilliant. So servant leadership. I hope you got something out of this today. Can I get a little bit political? Would that be all right? And without taking up too much time?
You know me.
Let's do it. So if you don't know, Claire was a Labour councillor. So you've definitely got political in your time, haven't you? One of the things that I saw Justin Wellesby, who is the Archbishop of Canterbury, who in theory is the most senior person in the Church of England in the UK.
In the world, I think.
In the world, is he? He's a top bloke. We've met him a couple of times. Have you met him, Claire? Met him a couple of times.
Really good lad.
Lovely chap. Liz Truss, our shortest ever Prime Minister, who didn't have a particularly good time in office. Let's put it that way. It was fraught, to say the least. So she resigns. Justin writes on Twitter, just praying for Liz, right?
Good one.
Well, you should see the comments that came out of that. Yeah, there was a lot of hatred and anger towards that very comment. Why would you pray for her? She's caused all this chaos. What about praying for those that are poor or needy? And just absolutely having a go at Justin because he said, she served, therefore I'm going to pray. And that's not his exact words. You'll have to read what he said on Twitter himself. And it was quite, I thought it was lovely actually what he said. And I thought, actually, this is a really interesting point, regardless of your political affiliation, especially in times like this.
Yeah.
As Christians, before you have an opinion about the party politics, you have to be praying for that political leader, right? And you still have to remember that these people are serving. Maybe it's out of selfish ambition. Maybe it's not.
Family. She's got teenage daughters who must be going to school, and everyone's going, "Hey, look at your mum." All of that is tough, isn't it? And absolutely need to pray for our leaders.
Yeah, and be thankful for those that are in public office. So there we go. Politics over. I just saw that and just thought, I can't believe people are responding like this. It's a really odd way to respond, but still, it may be the mood of the nation in some respects. So, Claire, what's coming up next week? I did tell you. I want to know if you remembered.
Whether I was listening. So, Sharon is going to be continuing John. We don't know what passage it is. It is. Sorry, that sounded like a swear word there. I'm sorry about that. I'm sure it'll be amazing because Sharon's fabulous. And then Rach Marshall is, am I meant to name names, surnames? I don't know.
Sure. We put it on the screen. So.
Oh, right. Okay. She's going to be hosting with you or by herself. Is she doing it all by herself?
Probably me. Maybe somebody else. We're looking at roads at the moment, so I'm not entirely sure. But we know that Rach is on it, so you'll be in safe hands.
Well.
So, yes. the Power Twins, Rach and Sharon, next week. Oh yes, you're not going to want to miss it. So do join us. If you haven't done so already, head over to the website, sign up for the newsletter, and we will email you every week with what's going on, the links, the transcript notes and all that sort of stuff. So it just comes straight through to your inbox. We're getting our newsletters to be a little bit better and a little bit more interesting. Obviously, make sure you subscribe to What's the Story. We didn't actually manage to get that podcast out this week, but it will be out next week, as in starting tomorrow, Monday. We've got a guy called Brett Curry. His story is going to be released. Then Mark Mitchell from the Mitchell Mazda fame. So yes, he's going to be on the podcast. Yeah, all amazing people. So they are coming to What's the Story. All that information is on the website, www.crowd.church. I can put it on the screen. There you go. Or you can connect with us via social media at Crowd Church. We would love to hear from you. We do have a midweek group on Wednesdays if you would like to come join in, and we pray in that group. Just a heads up, there are going to be some changes coming to the Crowd Church live stream in the coming weeks. We will keep you updated on that. All things things are going to be getting better, hopefully. So yes, fantastic. I'm just looking down the comments because Matt Crew normally reminds me of stuff that I've forgotten. So he's awesome at that. So I think I've told them, Matt, tell me if I've missed anything, because I don't think that I have right now. So yeah, Dion, have a great week. Everyone's in there saying have a great week. So thank you everybody for joining us in the comments. Claire, thank you for hosting with me. It's been the first time you and I have hosted.
Really
so
appreciate it.
We should have to do it again sometime. Fantastic. All right, folks, have a fantastic week. God bless you, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.